What we're going to be looking at today is this idea of percent proportion. We already know a couple ideas involved with the big concept. We know a percent is how much of a whole amount, and that percents are always going to be out of 100. No matter what, they will always be out of 100. Proportions, we just got done talking about. Two ratios that are set equal to each other. So if we think about what we have two ratios that are set equal to each other. I know that a percent is always out of 100. So over here, we're going to put 100. And we know that this is my percent out of 100. Now, if I think about what this means in the context of my other proportion, my other ratio here, I have to think about, well, what does the 100% represent? What would this other piece represent? If I had a pizza and I have 100% of that, that means I have a whole pizza. Now, what if I had 50% of that pizza? That would represent the part of the pizza that I have left, the part of the whole. So the whole represents 100%. That is the total amount. And the part represents that percentage of the whole. This is our percent proportion. What we're going to be doing on this unit is using this formula to identify the pieces in a question, substitute those pieces into our problem, so that if we were missing the part, we were missing the whole, or we were missing the percent, we would be able to find any of these missing pieces using this formula. So the most important thing, the key, is to identify the pieces to use in our proportion. This is my part, whole, and percent. I have to be able to identify these in order to know where to put those pieces within that percent proportion, or else there's no chance I'm going to get the question right. So if we look through here, I'm going to identify my parts with this purple, my wholes with the yellow, and my percents with the green. I want to look through each of these 6 questions. The easiest to spot is going to be the percent here. The percent's the easiest to find and identify because there's only 2 ways that it can be shown. It either has to have a percent sign, like right here in number 1 and number 2, number 5 and number 6, or we need to see the word percent. And that means that is typically, not always, but typically, I'm going to see that next to what. It's going to be asking me what percent. So that tells me that is the piece that I'm looking for in those questions. Percent, either I see the percent symbol or it asks me for a percent. Now, as we look at these others, 60% of 145 is what number? So now I have to start kind of thinking about, well, which of these is my part, which of these is my whole? 60% of 145 is what number? Well, I know that I'm looking for 60% of a number. So if I have 60% of a number, that's not the whole number. So this must mean that my part is what I'm looking for, and my whole is what I have right here, this 145. And number 2, 90% of 120. On one like this, we have to understand that this is asking us to find, is what number? What number is 90% of 120? And again, we have this idea that 90% of 120 is going to give me a part of that number. So my whole is this 120, and I'm going to just write in that I'm looking for the part. On number 3, We already identified the percent on all of these. So now we just look at that. Of 70 is 21. Of 70 is 21. What percent of 70 is 21? So again, now I'm looking at, and we have to be careful because percents can go over 100. So don't just automatically go to, well, this is the bigger number, this must be the whole, because it could be that the whole amount is less than the part that we have. We could have more than 100%. But in this case, I'm looking for what percent of 70 is 21. So it's asking me 21 is what part of 70. So 21 is my part, 70 is my whole. Number 4, what percent of 56 is 42? Well, when I look at this one, again, I see this idea of 56 is 42. So 42 is what percent of our whole amount of 56? So I'm going to mark that with our yellow to identify it as the whole. This one is purple to identify it as the part. And now we move on to numbers 5 and 6. Again, both of these are set up with the same language. 150 is 15% of what number? 150 is 15%. Right there in math, we have to kind of make that connection. 150 is. 150 equals 15%. And if we think about what we said in our proportion, we had part over whole equals percent over 100. So that part equals percent, whole equals 100. So we have our part right here, and we're looking for our whole number. On the last one, it's going to look the same. 198 is 33% of what number? So 198 is our part, and we're looking for that whole number. So now that we've identified all of our pieces, the next thing that we're going to do is we need to set up this proportion. We know that the basic outline of all of these percent proportions, we have our two ratios set equal to each other. Every time, our percent is going to be out of 100. This is the format that you can follow for every one of these problems. That it'll always look like this as a template. We have our part, is the value that'll go here. Remember, part over whole. So my whole value will go here, and my percent will go above the 100. Part over whole equals percent over 100. So now as we start going through and we start identifying these pieces, we look at number 1, 60%. We've already identified the 60%. So 60, I don't need the percent sign because a percent is out of 100. And I have that set up now. My whole was 145. And I'm looking for my part. Now, you can use X, you could use P if you wanted to use that for part, but choose a variable and use that in your process. We would go through the next one. Notice I can just erase those pieces right there. My part is what I'm looking for. So again, there's my X. Do I know my whole? I look, yeah, I've identified that as 120, and my percent is 90. If we look at numbers 3 and 4, each of these have the same basic outline. So on both of these, we're looking for the percent. So now my percent is the variable because that's the missing piece. My whole is 70 for number 3, and the part is 21. So now I've gone through and I've set up a model for numbers 3 and 4. Numbers 5 and 6, again, notice how every time the format stays the same. Ratio equals ratio, with the second ratio having the bottom number as 100. Again, I'm just looking. I've already identified my pieces. My percent was 15. My part is 150. And my whole is the missing piece now. That is the piece that we're trying to figure out. So if we look back through every single one of these problems, we were starting off looking for our part. Part is still in that top left. Part is still in that top left. The whole is in the bottom left, bottom left, bottom left. And our percent is in the top right, top right, top right, with the 100 in that same spot of the bottom right each time. So I've brought those 3% proportions that we set up from the last page over. The last thing we have to do now is just solve our proportion, find that missing piece. So again, what we do, we find our cross products. And I'm going to go through. So I have 100 times x equals 120 times 90. I bring my 100x down because right now there's no math that I can do with that. Equals 120 times 90 is going to be 10,800. Now when I look at the next step, I can go no further on the left side because I don't know what x is. And on the right side, I've done all the math that I can do. So now I need to get my x by itself. It's being multiplied by 100, so I do the opposite. I divide each side by 100, and x equals 108. Now every time I finish, I want to think about my answer. Does it make sense? Is 108 90% of 120? 90 is pretty close to a whole amount. 108 is pretty close to 120. So my answer seems reasonable. So let's move on to the next problem. Again, we set up our cross products. 21 times 100 equals 70x. 21 times 100 is 2,100, which equals 70x, because that's just brought down at this point. Again, I'm at that stage where there's nothing on the left side or right side of that equal sign that I can solve, so I need to get my variable by itself. I'm going to do the opposite of what's being done. So 70 is multiplying x, so I need to do the opposite, which is divide by x. And I end up here with 30 equaling x. 2100 divided by 70 is 30. 70 divided by 70 is 1, and 1 times x is just x. So now I can look. 21% is less than half. Half of 70 is 35. So I know that I'm at least in the right ballpark with that one. You can always go back and check these. If I set this up and I took my 30 and I substituted it in for x, would I get the same thing? Is 70 times 30 equal to the 2100. And yes, it is, so I know that I have the right answer. Alright, and then on the last one again, we're going to set up our cross products. 150 times 100 equals 15x. 150 times 100 is going to be 15,000 equals 15x. I'm at the stage where I need to divide each side by the 15, and I get 1,000 equals x. 1,000 equals x. So if we think about what this means, is 150 is 15%. 15% of a number. So as we're going through, we think about, well, if I multiplied, or even if I thought about that, this idea of the estimating, 15%, could I split 150 into thirds? Because I could get that to 10%. So that would mean that every 5% was 50. So 10% would be 100. And 10 times 100 is 1,000. So using that estimating, I can quickly go back through and see what I think about my work. What I want you to do now is practice. I want you to go through page 353, numbers 9 through 25 odds. You should be able to click on the link below. If not, then go to my website, go to our class page, and you can load your online textbook that way. If you have questions, I am around today, or email me if you have any troubles. You may work with your podmates and use your resources around you. Use the people that you're sitting with to help you identify and help you practice this skill.